Well, hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Celeste Harrison, and I'm so glad you're here joining us at Explorer Classroom today. Here at National Geographic, we believe in the power of exploration, wonder, and storytelling to change our world for the better. This Explorer Classroom YouTube show connects students from all around the world with our National Geographic Explorers for short lessons and time for all of your student questions. Today, our featured explorer is Dr. Korena Mafune. Korena is a soil ecologist who focuses on plants and fungi. She researches how trees, soil, and fungi work together to keep a forest nice and healthy. When a forest finds itself threatened by climate change, she wants to learn about how the relationship between plants and fungi might be able to help. In order to learn about the important role of fungi in ecosystems, Korena spends her time doing really cool work. She climbs up into trees, she digs down into the ground for soil samples, and she gets to work in a lab, all kinds of neat stuff. Today, she's going to share all about fungi, including the relationships they form with trees and other organisms, and the importance of fungi to our climate. Every time I hear her talk, it low-key blows my mind, so I can't wait for you all to have that same experience and see fungus in a whole new way. But first, I'd like to say a great big welcome to our viewers from around the globe. Our shout outs for this episode are going to Armijo Elementary, Becerro, Bloria Middle, Cascadia Montessori, Castaño, Eaton Elementary, Heathers, Horizon Charter, Kennedy, Cruz Elementary, Metzger, Mr. Nelson students, Miss Anders' class, Miss Artuga's class, Miss Baker, and all of the students from Sherwood Middle School Academic Magnet Academy, Miss Kay's class, Miss Ladon's class, Penn, Ryan International School, the Barnhouse School, and of course, all of our fabulous homeschools out there. Thrilled to have you joining us today. And with all of that talking from me out of the way, let's get this Explorer Classroom started. It is time for me to turn it over to Korena to blow your mind with all kinds of fun, fungi facts. Take it away, Korena.
All right, so excited to be here today with hopefully some of my future mini mycologists. After today, I hope that you are super excited about fungal organisms because I know I am. They really are so important. So it's great to see y'all on screen. Let me get started by sharing my screen and we can get sound share. You're sharing sound, so it won't let me share screen, I think. All right. There we go. It's never Zoom without a little bit of screen sharing. It's fun, isn't it? All right, can we see that? Yeah? All right, let's start from the beginning. And we will, that is not the beginning. Oh, you think third time would be the charm? Play from the start. There we go. All right. So today I am going to talk to you about fungal organisms, specifically the fungus, the climate, and you. I am just setting an own timer for myself real quick. All right, so I am really excited to share this with you because not only are fungal organisms so important and they interact in so many ways with the ecosystem around us, but they also have a big role in how our climate is responding and acting to things, and they also really involve you because, as I mentioned, and as we'll build the theme through today, everything really is connected. So at this point, you may or may not have learned a little bit about fungi. What we're looking at right here is a phylogenetic tree. So this is how things are related in a very simple form. There's so many more things out there, but we're just going to focus on this. So when we think about fungal organisms, we may wonder, are they a living organism? And yes, they very much are. They are very alive and doing amazing things that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And one of the things that I want to emphasize to you is that Kingdom fungi is super diverse. There's so much biodiversity, which means there's a lot of species within kingdom fungi, and we haven't even discovered some of them. So there's a lot of room for exploration and discovery. And when we look at where the fungal kingdom lands, we can look down here at a common ancestor. So millions and millions of years ago when things were evolving, and that things were branching off, there is a common ancestor between the plant kingdom, the fungal kingdom, and the animal kingdom. We're in kingdom Animalia over here because humans are animals. And as you can maybe think about, the animal kingdom is very diverse. There's like tigers, zebras, there's all of the things that live in the ocean, there's us, like super diverse. So when you think about the fungal kingdom and the plant kingdom, You can think about it that way too. There are so many organisms in there and they interact in different ways and they do different things, just like how humans do different things from certain other types of animals. And one of the really cool things that I always like to talk about is how kingdom fungi is our closest relative. So the most closely related kingdom to the animal kingdom is the fungal kingdom. And that's so cool to think about, that the fungal kingdom is our closest relative. Like, wow, like so cool. And one of the other things that we can see is that plants are over here too. But one of the special things that plants can do is plants can photosynthesize. So they're autotrophs. They can make their own food. Both the fungal kingdom and the animal kingdom cannot make their own food. We're heterotrophs. So we need to get food from different things, and so do fungi. And that kind of is what drives their role in ecosystems. So I'm sure that if we start talking about fungi, a lot of you may think about mushrooms. If I say fungi, who thinks about mushrooms? Raise your hand. Yeah, some. Okay. And that's totally fine because mushrooms are awesome. I mean, look at them. They're beautiful. They have different shapes, forms, sizes. They do different things depending on what type of mushroom you have. But do all fungi form mushrooms? No, they don't. So when you see a mushroom, there's something else to think about there. So not all fungi fruit mushrooms, because fungi have different ways of reproducing and they're very unique in their reproduction. Some fungi reproduce asexually, some fungi reproduce sexually, some can flip back and forth. They just do crazy things. And so when you see a mushroom, what that is the reproductive structure of a fungal organism. For example, we can compare this to a tree. So when you see a tree, the tree has roots, it has leaves, that is the organism of the tree. And then when the tree forms an apple, that apple is the fruit of the tree. So it holds the tree seeds, it's a fleshy fruit structure, and the tree produces it as a reproductive structure. When we look and see mushrooms, that is what is happening with the fungal organism. So mushrooms are a fruiting body of the fungal organism that you see, and what is actually below ground, or if you see a mushroom on a log or something, what's actually in the log, or if you see a mushroom on the ground, what's below ground is what we call a mycelial network. It's made up of fungal hyphae. So this fungal hyphae is expanding below ground, kind of like tree roots would, but it's expanding below ground or in logs or wherever you're seeing the mushroom. And the mushroom is just the reproductive structure of that fungal organism. So not all fungi fruit mushrooms as the reproductive structures. So if you were to walk into the forest with me and we were to dig a hole and take a sample of soil, just like if you had a spoon, like the spoon that you eat breakfast with, if you just took a handful of soil from a spoonful of soil, there's so many fungal organisms in that spoonful of soil. You just can't see them with your eye. So they are microorganisms. And within that spoon, you could have 10, 20, 30 feet of fungal hyphae, just super, super small floss-like threads, even smaller than floss. You'll also have a ton of fungal spores and other fungal structures, like something that we call sclerotia in the soil environment. So just because you can't really see them doesn't mean they're not there. There's so much diversity just in a handful of soil, and you just can't see it, but they're functioning and doing amazing things that really allow ecosystems to function. So don't let them trick you just because you can't see them all the time. They are very much there and they are doing something important. So when we think of fungi that don't fruit mushrooms, some of them still do have mycelial networks or hyphal networks below the forest floor. So for example, these are fungal organisms. I brought them back to the lab. I had a sample of a plant root. I cultured fungi from that plant root and put them on plates. And you can see that this is hyphae. So this is fungal hyphae on Petri dishes. You can see that there's different morphology. Some is like a burnt rust orange. There's one that's kind of black. There's one that forms like this petal arrangement, which is a similar species to this one forming a petal arrangement. And so this is what fungal organisms, or at least some of the fungal organisms, look like when you don't see mushrooms, because none of these fungi that I have on these plates would actually form mushrooms. So it's really cool to start thinking about just the vast diversity that you can come across when you're looking at the fungal kingdom. And so when we start thinking about the fungal kingdom and these roles that they play and their diversity, Do they help ecosystems function? They very much do in so many ways. And we're going to start talking about that. So first of all, what I want to emphasize is we're going to travel back in time on an evolutionary timeline. So like millions and millions of years ago, about 460 to 500 million years ago, like way before the dinosaurs even existed, right? And that is when plants evolved on land. So plants evolved on land from aquatic environments. And what the evidence tells us across the board is that when these more simpler early diverging plants started evolving on the landscape, they evolved with a fungal partner. So fungi was key in plants starting to establish on land. And then throughout that evolution, plants and fungi, they have a parallel evolution. So as plants evolved, fungi were evolving too. And there were so many different directions that they went to evolve in. For example, we started getting conifer trees. We started getting flowering plants. And one of the things that really stands true is because fungi were key to plants establishing on land, without fungal organisms, plants may not have been to be able to establish and evolve on land to like what we see in our forests today. And really, if you think about it in the bigger picture, because fungi hold such an important role in plant survival and plant evolution, without fungal organisms, plants might have never evolved, which means that maybe we never would have been here in the way that we are today without fungal organisms helping plants, because plants help us live, right? So really a lot of connectedness to start thinking about. And so when we think about their important role in ecosystems, there's several different groups of fungi, and I'm going to go over two of them today. The first one are decomposer fungi. So when we go out into a forest, there is a lot of stuff above ground that we can see, but I always tend to look at what is below my knees. What can I see that's towards the ground? And that's because there's just so many interesting things happening in forests. So some fungal organisms are decomposers. That means that in order to get their food, they break down dead organic matter. So dead organic matter, that can be tree logs that fall over, branches that fall off trees, or every fall, certain trees lose their leaves and distribute leaf litter on the forest floor. So leaves are really good for plants. So if you have a tree in the backyard and it drops its leaves, it's usually pretty healthy for the tree if you just leave the leaves there. Because what happens is fungal organisms decompose this organic material. And there's a ton of different fungi that can decompose different organic material. So it's very diverse in how they break these down. And so, for example, when you walk into a forest and you see a mushroom growing on a dead piece of wood, that means that its mycelial network is established in that log. And it's secreting things. It's allowing it to break that log down. And as it's breaking down leafy material, here's some fungal hyphae, it's also releasing nutrients that are in those leaves, like nitrogen and phosphorus. And trees need nitrogen and phosphorus and other nutrients to survive. So decomposer fungi are really important because they recycle this material into the soil and allow it to become available again for the plants that are growing. So very important in ecosystem function. And the very special thing about fungal decomposers is they are champions at breaking down really complex compounds. So I mentioned large woody debris, right? So if a big tree dies and falls in the forest, that tree structure, that log, it's made of really complex compounds. For example, a compound which we call lignin. Don't worry about remembering this. I'm just trying to show you how complex a lignin compound can be, because there's a lot going on, as we can see. So say this is lignin, right? Fungal organisms are the only organism that we know of that we've discovered that is actually efficient in breaking down lignin. So it can break down lignin into less complex compounds, and then other fungi can also break those down, and then bacteria can start getting their hands on them and helping decompose too. But what's really amazing is just that fungi have evolved to break down these really complex compounds. So if we didn't have fungal organisms, it already takes hundreds of years for a big log to decompose with the help of fungi. Just think about how long it would take for a log to decompose. Would it ever decompose? Like that would take hundreds and hundreds of years for it to break down without the help of fungi. So really important in breaking down things and recycling nutrients. We could only imagine what would happen if leaves and logs just kept stacking up. We would be like drowning in organic matter without the help of fungi, right? And so another thing that we can think about when we think about decomposers' roles and climate change is that Depending on an ecosystem, it can influence how things function. So, for example, as these fungi are breaking down organic material, they are also releasing CO2 to the atmosphere. CO2 is a bad greenhouse gas. We do not want any more of it in our atmosphere. We're trying to find ways to manage it. And you can also think about ways to better manage that. It's not that decomposer fungi are bad. They are critical to the environment. They break down things, they release nutrients, but within that process, they can also release CO2. And what scientists have been seeing is that as we face a changing climate, some of these processes are speeding up. So fungi that may not have released CO2 at as high of a rate are starting to decompose faster and releasing more CO2. So climate change can really have a negative impact on how some of these fungal organisms are functioning, which could have a negative impact on our environment and, for example, greenhouse gas emissions. And so that was decomposer fungi. And now we're going to talk about my favorite group of fungi, which is mycorrhizal fungi. So mycorrhizal fungi is a mutualistic group of fungi. Remember when I talked about land plant evolution and there was evidence in the fossils that there was fungi associating with really early evolutionary plants? That is mycorrhizal fungi. And so I almost think of it as mycorrhizal fungi form a friendship with plants, right? So they actually almost like hold hands, like with the plant root. So what happens here is, and I want to emphasize that there's not mycorrhizal fungi just some places. Like any forest you go in, there's going to be mycorrhiza. About 85% of plants worldwide form mycorrhizal associations. So it's not just some plants here and some plants there. It is a majority of plants that somewhat depend on these mycorrhizal relationships. Like, for example, orchids, really beautiful flower, one of the most diverse plant genuses. Some orchids depend on mycorrhiza to even start growing. So it's really amazing to think about how crucial these plant mutualists are. And so what happens in a mycorrhizal relationship is the mycorrhiza actually goes into the plant root. Depending on the type of mycorrhiza, for example, there's some mycorrhiza that fruit mushrooms. There's other mycorrhiza that will just make spores underground. So you'll never actually see them unless you look under a microscope. And these mycorrhiza go inside the plant root. They form these structures which can exchange nutrients for sugars. So plants can photosynthesize, make sugars, and then the fungus can actually reach nutrients. So plant can be like, I really need phosphorus and I can't reach that nitrogen. My rooting system is just not big enough. And then the mycorrhiza in mycorrhizal language is like, well, hey, plant, I need sugars to feed myself. Like I can reach out my hyphal network, my mycelial network, and I can grab that phosphorus or nitrogen for you if you want to trade me some of your sugars so I can feed myself. And then the plant's like, sounds like a sweet deal. Like let's, and then they form this mutualism. And so plants all over have mycorrhizal mutualisms where the mycorrhiza is helping the plant get nutrients and the plant in return is giving the mycorrhiza sugar. So when we think about that in a changing climate, it's very, very important because when we walk through a forest or any ecosystem, you might only think about what you see above ground, but I will tell you right now that there is a whole hidden half below ground. And that is really what is driving everything we see above ground, just so many interactions, so many complexities going on down there. And so if we start looking at it from a below ground perspective, we can see that there's the rooting system, right? And then there's nutrients. Maybe there's some nutrients that the roots can reach, but then there's other nutrients that the roots won't be able to reach. And as I mentioned earlier, the unique thing about trees is trees, they can feed themselves. They can make their own food. And how they do that is through photosynthesis. So trees eat or take in the CO2 in their leafy material, so that bad greenhouse gas that we don't like. Trees can actually clean it out of the air for us. However, with the increase of CO2 emissions and the decrease of forests because deforestation and things like that, and fires because of climate change, we are losing forests and we are seeing more CO2. So it's really important to think about how forests help us in taking in CO2 and making a healthy environment. Because what they also do is when they take in that CO2, they break it down, they convert it, they make it into sugars, and then they release oxygen for us to breathe, right? Like we need oxygen to breathe. Like, hey, thanks trees for allowing us to breathe and like making us oxygen. Like you're so cool for doing that. Thank you very much. And what happens when they do that is they cycle these sugars that they're making from photosynthesis down into the forest floor soil. If we think about the soil environment without fungi, there's not too much there besides plant roots. And oxygen is good, right? So sorry, that was supposed to pop up. But if we incorporate fungal organisms, it just, there's endless exploration and so many more things going on. So plants are making sugars, they're transporting them down to their rooting system, to the fungal network, because what the fungi is doing is, again, it's extending that rooting network and it's allowing the plants to access those nutrients that they might not be able to reach. And also what it's doing is that as it's helping these plants get food and grow bigger and stronger and maybe photosynthesize more and take in more CO2 and release more oxygen, what it's also doing is it's storing carbon. So that bad carbon that we don't want in our atmosphere, trees and rooting systems really help store that carbon, but fungal organisms, especially mycorrhiza, hold a huge role in storing that carbon in our soil systems. And that's carbon that we don't want in our atmosphere. So mycorrhizal fungi and how they interact with plants is really important when you start looking at climate change and how things are changing. Because, for example, if a forest is cut down, this mycorrhizal network is the hyphae is going to turn over. It's not going to be able to survive anymore. It can release more carbon. So a lot of things going on to start thinking about, and it's all happening below our feet. And so when we think of mycorrhiza and we think of trees and we think of interactions and climate change, when we have healthy mycorrhizal relationships and healthy forests, we have a healthier planet. So it's really important to think about how to manage those things. And so you're probably wondering, where does my research come in? Like, you're talking about fungi, you're talking about mycorrhiza, and you're talking about soils on the ground. But in some ecosystems, soils happen above ground, like in the temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest coast, or in some of the tropical rainforests, the cloud forests. Over in New Zealand, there's other temperate rainforests. There's canopy soils. And what these are is over hundreds of years. These are very old trees. Canopy soils form through decomposition. So the mosses and the ferns establish, the trees lose their leaves, those land on the branches. Fungi and bacteria are working on the decomposition processes, breaking that down into this rich organic matter, which we call canopy soil. So canopy soil is on tree branches. It's so cool. And within those canopy soils, I found rooting systems, and I was really interested in what type of mycorrhiza were in those rooting systems. And you can see right here, this is a root sample. So these are really small roots. Think of like a pencil tip, like skinnier than a spaghetti noodle. This is actually mycorrhizal fungi connected to the root tip. And if you look really closely, it might be, sorry if it's a little blurry, you can actually see some spores in there. So that's how small these organisms are. But they are up there in the canopy in these really rich nutrient soils, helping plants uptake nutrients high above the forest floor. And you can see that if we put that fungi under a microscope, we can see the fungal structures in these tiny roots. So this is a long section of a root right here. That green is fungi. We can see these black structures. Those are fungal structures that are helping the trees exchange nutrients for sugars. And we also have a wide diversity of decomposer fungi up there. So again, breaking down nutrients. And so when we think of climate change and we think of canopy soils, are they important? Yes, they have to be, because they have so much more nutrients than you see in the forest floor. Like, they're really rich organic soils, and they have a lot of tasty food for plants. A lot of nitrogen, a lot of phosphorus. I researched that. And they have these mycorrhizal fungi to help them obtain these nutrients in the canopy soil environment. So it can really help the trees, for example, when they're experiencing summer droughts and they're really stressed out because they're rainforests. They don't really like going into drought. And it's really important to study not only plant fungal interactions on the ground, but when canopy soils are in an ecosystem, it's really important to look at them up there too, because using my imagination, trees aren't just growing roots that are associating with obligate mutualists. up in the canopy that are doing nothing. Like they're helping these trees out in some sort of way, whether it be little or whether it be substantial. And so just to wrap it up, I just want to reiterate that fungal organisms are so important. They support all life on Earth. And without fungal organisms, we likely would not be here. If you took all of them out of the world today, I'm sure it would crash in a matter of minutes. And we need more scientists to really help understand fungi and their importance in a changing world, especially with climate change, because they really drive a lot of forest functions and functions in ecosystems all around the world. And we have just started touching the tip of the iceberg in fungal discovery. There's so much more to be discovered out there. And overall, if you are interested, you can definitely be a scientist. You can start young, you can start now. And if you want, you can even grow up to be a professional tree climber, because I did. And look at me now, I'm just learning awesome things about fungi all the time. So with that, I will turn the floor over, and I am excited to answer questions.
Brilliant. And as we start to wrap up for the day, Korena, do you have any advice for all the young people in your audience?
Yeah. Can I see a show of hands? Who's excited about mushrooms after this presentation? Yay. Yeah. So that is my yay, more hands. So my biggest takeaway is get excited about science, whether it's mushrooms, whether it's plants, whether it's the ocean. We need people to be excited, people who want to explore, people who want to discover, people who want to ask those questions that have never been answered. If I never asked what's going on in the treetops of the canopies, we might not ever know. So just be ambitious, think of questions, go out and discover things. If you want to become a mini mycologist, you totally can. I definitely support that. You can go online, you can find different resources. There's, for example, some areas have mycological clubs where they teach you about mushrooms and teach you about foraging and things like that. And there's just so many ways to get involved and explore. So don't think you need to wait to be older to start becoming a scientist. You can start doing that now if you haven't already. Like, for example, they're doing science in their class by growing different types of mushrooms on different substrates. So just let that imagination run wild, focus it down on questions that you want to answer, and don't ever doubt yourself and your ability to go out and answer those questions. Just keep exploring.
Incredible advice, incredible work. Thank you so much for being out there doing this very cool stuff, and for being here hanging out with us to tell us all about it. Another thank you to our students for your amazing questions, to teachers who make cool stuff like this happen for your classes. I hope to see you guys at some of our upcoming events. If this time works well for you, next week we'll be here learning about giant frogs. Giant snails. The week after that is the frogs. I think they're regular size. And this coming Friday, so not tomorrow, but the next one, we have a special 1 hour long show with award-winning National Geographic photographer Joel Sartore, all about the photo arc, which is his quest to photograph every single species living in captivity on our planet. You can register your student group for a shout out during the event and a chance to be up here on screen at netgeoed.org/explorerclassroom. I want to take a second here at the end to acknowledge that today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and encourage all of you to make some time and space this week to learn about the Holocaust and to remember the millions of victims lost to it. Have a fabulous day. Stay curious, keep exploring, and we'll see you back here soon on Explorer Classroom. Bye.